Good evening, everyone. And I want to welcome you once again to my country. So I'm really glad to be here. I came for these 20 minutes. So I am also grateful for the organizers to having brought me here all the way from Switzerland. My wife is not as happy. Let me start off, since I'm going to speak about empathy, to relate very briefly about a very interesting conversation I had last night over dinner with two very charming ladies. And at some point, about 45 minutes into the conversation, we started talking about love. The love that we have for our children. And one of the ladies said, I wish one day you would be pregnant so you have the experience of feeling this intense love constantly for a being that is growing inside of you. And I went to my bedroom at night and I fell asleep thinking, what a great way to focus on empathy by telling me to, try to be pregnant one day. So I woke up 3 times to the toilet at night, and I woke up with my feet swollen and with a big craving for olives. But the fact is that it prepared me a little bit to engage with you tonight. I know that, as Luca said, I am the one separating all of us from a nice dinner and some drinks. So I am just going to go through my presentation. If there is anything in the presentation that you would like us to explore deeper or further in the next couple of days, please reach out and let's make sure that we continue the conversation. So this is going to be like a few drops of water. I don't intend to get you all wet. Okay, so let me start by showing you the world we live in. This is a picture from the 31st of December of 2012. I have been following climate change for 15 years. And the last day of the year, I like to take a screenshot of this website that measures a lot of indicators of how we are doing as a planet. And as you can see, I want you to focus on carbon emissions. That year, we emitted 33 billion metric tons of carbon emissions. 1 metric ton of carbon occupies the space of a sphere that is about 11 meters in diameter, or 33 feet in diameter. Which means that in this area we are here, we could probably fit 2 very packed metric tons of CO2. If there were 2 metric tons of CO2 in this room right now, by the end of my conversation, we would all be dead. So it's a highly toxic gas, and we were emitting 33 billion a year 6 years ago. So last week that I was preparing the slides, I went to check how we were doing this year. And this picture is from, November 1st of this year, and we were already at 33 billion. And we still have November and December to go, which is when it gets cold in the northern hemisphere, and we need heaters, and we emit more carbon. So this year, we just went through the roof. We lost control of our emissions, even though we are doing all we can to reduce that trend. So this is what's happening essentially in the planet for the last 200 years, but more intensely the last 50, and especially this century, the last 18 years. Consumption of natural resources has far exceeded the planet's ability to regenerate itself, to recover those resources that we are taking from it. By some estimations, it was around 1985 when we crossed the limit beyond which the planet can no longer take what we take from it. And right now, we are at about 1.5 Earth's worth of resources that we are consuming on a yearly basis. And we are continuing the pace of growth. So, if you put into perspective the trends that we are living as a civilization, that most likely the population of Africa, which is about 1 billion today, is going to double by 2050. and it's going to quadruple by 2100, then the scenario is not looking very promising for how much we are going to be consuming from our planet. And I think it is important that we keep in mind that if we want to flourish as an ecosystem, as a species, as a civilization, as a nation, as a community, as a corporation, as individuals, we are going to seriously need to regenerate the degraded ecosystems that we are living in. And there is a very simple truth about resources. Every single input that we use for industrial production comes from nature. And by industrial production, I don't necessarily mean a factory that is building a good that is then being consumed. If you work in the service field, as you all do, and you have a very lean virtual operation and you work from home or you work remotely, you still need food to run your operation. You need energy. And that food comes from nature. I know I am saying something that is obvious, but it allows us to understand that we have been, up until now, in a linear process where we extract resources, we produce, we distribute, we consume, and then we discard. And we pile up a lot of waste in the oceans, in the forests, in the rivers, in the atmosphere. And we need to transition very quickly into a circular economy, an economy that is focused in the restoration, the reutilization, the recycling of materials, to make sure that every residue of an industrial process becomes an input of some other process. And in circular economy, as in many other fields of sustainability and environmental policy, the European Union is our leader, so we follow what they have to suggest and say to us about this. And these pictures, I really like them very much because this is exactly the kind of transformation that we need in order to transfer into a circular economy. We have to move from a notion where the man is on top of a pyramid in the ecosystem and actually the woman a little bit below, and move into an ecological understanding of how much we are interdependent with all other species in the planet. So, this is the picture. If I could go back to this picture throughout the next 15 minutes, I want you to have this in mind, okay? But I'm here to talk about empathy. And empathy is, to my understanding, one of the two key components of peace. And peace is relevant because essentially what we need to do is to launch and engage with nature in peace and in harmony. So my favorite definition of conflict is also a very simple one, and it basically is an incompatibility of goals. So if our rate of consumption of natural resources is incompatible with the ability of the planet to sustain life on Earth, then we have a conflict. You may have heard the story of two sisters that were going to the kitchen because they wanted to prepare some sort of dish or follow some recipe, and they each needed an orange. But there was only one orange in the fridge. So they started arguing about the orange, and at some point the mother came in and said, what's all the fuss about? They said, well, we need the orange, and there's only one. And the mother said, so what do you need the orange for? And one of them said, I am going to prepare a salad dressing, so I need the juice. And the other one said, I need to bake a cake, so I need the peeling. And immediately, they both realized that they could share the orange and do both recipes without having to cut it in half or fight over it. And this is something that they realized only because they were able to become empathic to the other. They were able to step on the other's shoes. And in that particular case, the mother was the facilitator to allow them to see each other's needs. So empathy is about solving the other person's problems. So my favorite definition of peace is the ability to transform conflict empathically and creatively. In any situation you are, obviously business included, if you think about the other, and if you think creatively, then most likely you're going to get to a resolution that solves your problem and the other person's problems. You might have heard the story of a man that comes into the subway one night with his 3 children. And they sit around, scattered inside the train. And the children start making a lot of noise and a lot of mess and running around and screaming. And the passengers start getting a little bit disturbed. And the father is looking away out the window. And the disruption that the children are making is so big that at some point, one of the passengers approaches the father and says, "Aren't you going to do something about your children's behavior?" And the father looks at the man and says, "I'm sorry, we're coming from the hospital and the mother of my children just passed away. And I don't know how to deal with this situation." So in that moment, the passengers developed a sense of understanding and kindness and compassion for the man and the children that immediately changed the way they were thinking about this disruption. That is empathy. And this is what we need to generate as part of our attitude to life. So back to the planet. At the rate at which our demographics are growing, and by some estimates, by the end of this century, we will be 11 billion people on the planet. But before we get to 11, we're going to go through 9. And that's going to happen somewhere before 2050, which is not far from now. And I want to ask us all a question. How can we feed 9 billion people? That's already a challenge in itself. But I want to make the challenge even bigger. How can we feed 9 billion people utilizing 100 times less water, 100 times less land, and emitting less carbon emissions than we emit today? So this is the kind of exponential thinking that we need in order to really fix what's wrong with the planet. And if we are doing business in the planet, then we might as well make sure that the planet has plenty for our business to continue flourishing. So this is a business problem that we have. And what we need is this kind of exponential change. Think about it. In this planet, we have roughly 1 billion people that have no access to electricity. 2 billion people that have no access to clean drinking water. 3 billion people that cannot afford 3 meals per day. And 4 billion people that are not connected to the internet. And you guessed right, most likely these 4 billion include those 3, and these 3 include those 2, and those 2 include this 1 billion. So this billion people is absolutely excluded from the lifestyle that we share. So are we thinking about them? Are we being empathic with them? Can we solve their problems? And there's another billion people that we need to think of, and actually that's what this week is all about, which is the 1 billion tourists that are traveling across borders every year. I don't know if some of you are familiar with Peter Diamandis. He says, the best way to become a billionaire is to help 1 billion people. So I encourage you tonight to become billionaires and to try to figure out ways to solve problems for 1 billion people. And you are all in the business of figuring out how to better target solutions for 1 billion tourists. So my question would be, can we think beyond? Can we think about ways in which we can satisfy the needs of those tourists in a way that would also include the other 4 billion? And I ask myself, what do tourists want? And this is a question that you know much better than me. I've only been a part-time tourist for the last 16 years. But I believe that tourists want exotic destinations and unique experiences and an ethical fulfillment to feel that we are doing the right thing. So I also believe that tourists are on a constant search for something that is very basic to our collective humanity. And they are constantly trying to prove if this is true and how to figure it out. And it is that similarities unite and differences enrich. That's why we travel. We travel to find the commonalities with the people in the places we visit. And we also travel to tell the differences. And this is very important because diversity is the key to regeneration. A forest is not a plantation of one tree, one species of tree. It's a great variety of species that coexist together. Animals, fungi, plants, trees. But essentially, I think this is what tourists want. And in thinking in terms of empathy, it is not only something that we need to utilize with our fellow human beings. We also need to develop empathy with other forms of life. So when we talk about regeneration, the immediate answer is, okay, we need to plant more trees. Yeah, we know we need to plant more trees. Part of the problem is that a lot of the land where those trees should be planted is not there anymore. Another part of the problem is that some trees take 1,000 years to grow. And we know how important trees are. But if we want to get serious about regeneration of degraded ecosystems, we have to start thinking about agriculture. And you might think that this is not so directly related to you, but, well, everything we're going to eat tonight has been harvested somewhere, one way or another. And also when we talk about regeneration, we focus on carbon emissions, as I mentioned before. And what we want is, yes, to transform our sources of energy to renewables. So how do we harvest the energy from the sun is the key question, and it's being tackled in a very productive way worldwide. In 12 years from now, a lot of our energy is going to be renewable thanks to the evolution of solar energy. It is changing, it is becoming more and more efficient at the same pace as computer microprocessors became efficient since the 1960s. Some of you might be familiar with Moore's law that applies to computer microchips. And Moore's law says that every 18 months, more or less, the capacity of a microprocessor doubles and its price is cut by half. So the result of that is that the computing capacity that you all carry in your pockets is greater than the one NASA had when they put a man in the moon. And what are we doing with that computing capacity in our pockets? So it's not only about the sources of energy, and it's not only about the transformation to electric mobility and electric cars and vehicles and autonomous cars. As I said before, we need to focus on agriculture and more particularly agroecology. How do we grow our food in a way that it is integrated within the ecology that we belong to? And this is a key question, and there are some solutions already, but we have to figure out a way to scale them up to feed 9 billion people in 30 years from now. I've been wondering, and I want to ask you, does anyone know what happens to the residue of your shampoo and your toothpaste once it's flushed down the sink? Where does it end? If we want to do an empathy exercise with this, think about which species do you think feed on our leftover toothpaste and shampoo? And if we want to think in terms of business development, could we create shampoo and toothpaste that is actually food for other species? I think this is the key to innovation, to regeneration. The innovation of solutions that actually make the problem better and not make the problem worse. So empathy is critical in innovation because it can be used as a constraint. And the constraint is, yes, let's develop cosmetics that can be food for other species in the ecosystem. I do have to say that this morning I went for a wonderful massage here at the Wake Spa. And they have some products that are made in Costa Rica. I was very proud of that. That have a certification of 100% biodegradable products. So I looked at it, I went online to search more about it, and they are actually developing cosmetics that completely biodegrade in nature because they are natural essences, natural oils, no chemicals. So we need a lot more of that, and we need to scale them up, and we need to figure out a way to introduce them into the business models that we all belong to. Okay, I think this is too small to read, unfortunately. I took this picture 2 weeks ago in Porto, in Portugal, and it shocked me. It says, "Stop tourism," and tourism is misspelled. But it shocked me because I realized as a tourist that I was not being welcome. And it's not the first time that I am not being welcome. I was not welcome in Venice, I was not welcome in Barcelona, and I was not welcome in Porto. So something needs to be fixed, and it's up to us to fix it. So how do we satisfy the needs of 1 billion tourists in a way that we are welcome? Recently, I saw a study that says that the neurological connections that take place in a football fan when they are watching a football match on TV is exactly the same as the neurological activity of a football player scoring the goal in the pitch. Which means that virtually, someone watching at a distance has the same exact emotional impact as someone actually doing the activity. So could we think about virtual tourism one way or another? I know it sounds boring, but last year I was in Sardinia in Italy, and it was a rainy day, and we went to a museum, not because it was rainy, but we went to a museum and it was raining. And they had a virtual tour of the island as they lived 1,500 years back. And it was absolutely amazing. Because you get one of these helmets of virtual reality, and you spend 10 minutes seeing how people used to live right there. And it made me think, could I one day put one of these helmets and see dinosaurs walking on the Grand Canyon? Or millions of turtles hatching and laying their eggs in the east coast of Australia? I think this is doable. And I think this would definitely allow for a lot of people to develop empathy for a place or for an experience, even if they don't physically go there. So apart from having 1 billion customers today, maybe you could have 2 or 3 billion customers of experiences that are targeted to a niche market of people that want to have a 15-minute tour of somewhere in the world. And I think what we need, now that we have all these technological tools at our hand, is to build a community that follows a meaning and that follows a message. Today, with the technology we have, each and every one of us is a very enthusiastic amateur journalist. And technology allows us to do really amazing things today. So could we build a community around a hashtag that would allow us to develop empathy for a particular experience? I was briefly speaking to my wife today, and I was telling her, well, there's no Wi-Fi, so I really can't talk to you. And she said, okay, well, before you go remote, let me know so I can wish you good luck tonight. And I thought, go remote? What does that mean? I thought it was so powerful, because since last night that I've had no Wi-Fi and I've been looking at the walls all over in my room, I thought, this feels right. This morning I went out for a run in the forest, and I said, I'm not going to bring my headphones. I'm just going to listen to nature, because we are going remote. And it felt very different. It was an amazing experience. So there is a message, there is a meaning behind what we're doing that is very powerful and can be spread. And in spreading it, we are going to develop empathy for sure. Okay, so this is the switch that we want to make tonight. You know, like if you had a switch in your forehead and you actually move it from one side to the other. We live in a planet that is essentially a natural environment. And within that natural environment, there are communities of human beings scattered around, and of any other species, but specifically of human beings. And only where there are communities of human beings, we have a market economy. So the market economy is this tiny system that only operates where there are humans, and humans only exist in some scattered places around the planet. So if the planet is suffering, our societies will be suffering. And if our societies suffer, our market economies will suffer too. So what we need to fix is not business. What we need to fix is not the economy. What we need to fix is the ecology. That's our business model. That's the reason why we want to do what we want to do, and that's why empathy is so important, because we have to think beyond who we are as a civilization. We have to think about everything else out there. Okay, wrapping up. I can't leave without mentioning very briefly the other large acceleration that is going to affect everything we do in the next 10 years. The fourth industrial revolution essentially means that artificial intelligence is going to be utilizing data as the new raw material. That's the new frontier. And that's why it's so important that we have this global conversation about data. And that is why Facebook gives you a free app on your phone that you can use all the time, as long as you give them their data, your data. And you are. And you're giving a lot of data all the time to a lot of companies that are adding value to it and monetizing it. So the question is, how can you utilize artificial intelligence and data to better cater to the needs of your customers? The tourism industry is also going to change radically the next 10 years because of artificial intelligence. So I want us to be aware of this so that we are better able to utilize these tools to adapt to the new world that is coming very quickly. This is the Agenda 2030, Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. I just want you to see the picture because this is a roadmap. This is a global agenda that all countries are striving to achieve by 2030 with a great list of indicators of areas in which we need to catch up in order to be by 2030 where we need to be in order to fix a lot of the problems we have. To conclude, this is my lovely grandmother. Her name is Esperanza. And for those of you who do not speak Spanish, Esperanza means hope. So I was very pleased to see her this Sunday. She's 103 years old. And yeah, I'll be around for a while. And she gives me hope for many reasons. But now that I have children, this little girl, her name is Inga, and she's 18 months old. my grandmother allows me to understand that this girl is going to be 103 if she makes it in the year 2120. 2120. So this makes me realize that I am the link between the early 20th century and the early 22nd century, where none of us will be there. Maybe my daughter will be there as an ancient woman, but her children might, and her grandchildren definitely will be there. So it gives me the responsibility to try to do the best I can in order to give her and her descendancy the best opportunities to live in this planet that I have lived in. And here, I think we are all involved, because it is our generation. It's not only me. It's not only my child. This is everybody's child. So, I want us to leave tonight thinking, how else can we fix the problems that we have and utilize our industry, the tourist industry, which is a very powerful driving force to get there. Because if it's not us, then who? And if it's not now, then when? Thank you very much.